Hello, this is Michael Tabb at the end of week 2 of my courses, Character Creation and Development, and Writing for Film and Animation, which is basically screenwriting, single storytelling. Um, so I'm here first and foremost to answer questions about anything you read this week or anything you've been working on. So I'm going to open it up to who's here and say, hey, got any questions for me?
All right, I got a question.
Wonderful.
Um, so the protagonists, their inner journey, their change, is it okay if they go, because from what I get, it always seems like they go from a negative trait to a positive trait, right?
It
So is the
sometimes that way, but in a tragedy, you can go the opposite
yeah,
way.
you can go that's fine if it goes the opposite way.
Absolutely. Somebody has to learn to, well, obviously, a killer might see a person who becomes a killer or a bad person might see it as a positive trait. For example, they may go from meek to, un, you know, the opposite of courageous, and their idea of courage is killing people who are wrong. They might see it that way. But you could go from moralistic to hedonistic to killer. Somebody who's pursuing some that allows you to say, okay, it's not a profession. It's how they're changing, how they take action. Vengeful, um, you know, law abiding to vengeful. That's that can work. Revenge is more of an outer journey, but if somebody's spiteful, if somebody grows to be spiteful or violent, if they were meek and they become violent, that's a character arc. You know, um, yeah. So you can definitely go in either direction.
Okay,
But just make sure that whatever direction they're going in, that is going to speak to the premise. Because the most important thing about the inner journey is that the whole idea of an inner journey is designed to prove what it is you're trying to say. If what the premise is trying to say is um, sometimes revenge is more satisfying than uh, living peacefully, or whatever, um, then obviously the character would start as peaceful and go to vengeful or killer, or whatever, however you choose to word those behavior patterns that they're changing their personalities.
okay, thank you.
Of course, my pleasure. Are there any other questions?
I have one. Let's see if I can remember what it was. You were commenting, one of your comments on my work group from week 1
Huh?
was on one of my premises, which I'm not necessarily attached to. I didn't think it was anything special, but just for the sake of clarity, I wanted to ask.
It's not a good premise. We need to be attached to our premises. We need to go, you know what? That's worth writing about. So, all
Right.
right, so go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I didn't pick that one, so no worries. but it was the one that said culture turns people into mindless followers, basically.
Right.
And you said, well, I can think of a lot of cultures that do the opposite.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, isn't that just an argument against? Isn't that kind of what we're going for when there's something you can say against it, or how does that work?
Well, I was just trying to, because I don't know if you could argue that culture adds nothing. So my question was, if you meant pop culture, it might make more sense if that's what you're referring to. Yes, there should be a counter argument, but the counter argument shouldn't be. It should be strong, but it shouldn't be provable. You should be able to defeat the counter argument. Otherwise, your premise will not hold true. And I just didn't see, at least in saying culture in general creates mindlessness. Um, I'll be honest, I'm a Jew, and as a matter of fact, the word Israel, we were called Israelites for a long time, and the whole, literally, we're named after Israelites, and what Israelite means is he who wrestles with God. It means we don't take anything for granted, even God him or herself. It means you're supposed to wrestle with everything. It means you give it thought. It means you challenge yourself to understand and push. That you need to think things through. And just because anybody says something, even God, it doesn't mean that is beholden. Now, of course, in the Bible, eventually what happens is the people who question God, they come to realize and trust what God says. And they have these great stories in the Bible that show, though, that you should do certain things and you shouldn't do certain things. And anyway, I'm not going to get into a biblical thing, but I just know that cultures can push people to reach beyond themselves, beyond to constantly grow, to constantly question. So
the main
I
issue
just didn't see it. If it was pop culture, I could see the argument, and I could see how somebody could argue that it would. You're fighting for what is you're talking about. Anyway, you get the idea.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. Does that make sense? Does that work? Does that?
Yeah, one key thing you said made a lot of sense. Just that it needs to not be the counter argument needs to not be provable. So that
Oh, no, Kim. Well, it has to have an argument, but it has to fail. Yeah, it should be something that people, something people believe. It's like one of the students offered the the premise that mother's love has no limits. Um, uh, and that's a cliche. I much prefer somebody trying to prove, you don't want to stick to cliches. You want a mother's love has its limits. That was something that I talked about in the last session that we did. It's just figuring out what's important to you and how you can take what people believe and go, wait a minute, think about this. And if you can do that for the other human beings that surround you in the world, you'll be creating work that will be enlightening, whether it's happy or not. Are there any other questions?
I was just formulating one in my mind. So, is it better? It seems that with when you get more personal with a premise, which is kind of what I'm gathering that we're supposed to do, they get more specific rather than broad. And I'm wondering if it's better to keep it broad so that your story can, I don't know how to say that, be more broad.
Well, there's a difference between broad and vague. And it's an important differentiation. Mothers saying mothers are popular enough in this world. There are enough of them that it's not so vague that it's a particular situation. It's not like mothers in Afghanistan.
Right.
Because that's too specific. Saying that people should be nice. That's too vague. What quality makes somebody a good person? If you figure out if you can do this, then people will appreciate you as a human being. What is it? What is the answer? What is the one thing? So it's specific enough to go to hold up one finger, and this is the thing you need to understand about this. But it needs to pertain to a lot of people. So it's a fine line of specific as well as broad enough that everybody who walks out of the theater can apply it to their lives and understand it, because everybody has a mother. That's the whole thing about a thing about mothers is everybody's got one or had one at some point. So in a sense, everybody, it relates to everybody. And that's one of the key things to making sure your premise is not too specific, not vague. Does that help?
So if I can, if I can try to apply that to where I was trying to go with this week's assignment, the premise that I chose, just because it seemed to get the most positive feedback from you, was that a man's fate is always in his own hands, but you asked for it to be much more specific. So I went with addiction is an excuse, which I was thinking is kind of specific, but from what you're saying, there's tons of different kinds of addiction. So I kind of went a boring route and made, some addictive drug substance in a fantasy world that I'm kind of building a story around. But I'm thinking that it might be better to explore different kinds of addiction.
Well, I know people who are addicted to love, who are addicted to relationships, who are, codependence is a form of addiction. So people can be addicted to something other than a physical substance. And you have to ask yourself what addiction is, and that is not being able to move ahead without it, like being unfunctional. Now there are the things that aren't addiction are things you need to live. And the hardest things are, uh, you know, everybody struggles with something, whether it's smoking or drugs or, food. I have an addiction of food, and it's hard because I have to eat it every day to survive. But the question is, where do you draw the line? You could be addicted to good food or good wine or, Bacchus isn't, so addiction is a worthy thing to explore and understand, especially if you're going to be talking about addiction, that it's not merely substances. I think that it's a good idea to confront the idea of addiction and understand that, it can be drinking, it can be, it can be any number of things. Everybody can have an addiction, which allows you to fill the script with characters, and you can think about what their character traits are and what they do and how they involve in the story. And some people I feel are addicted to drama, and they constantly stir up drama so they can be a part of it, because that's what it makes their life exciting. So I would think about, as you're designing each of the different character types, I would think about, what are they addicted to? And if you look at what their character flaw is, or what they're trying to accomplish, or if it's one of the supporting characters, how they're trying to help other people, or what their job is in the film, you may find out, realizing the kind of things they do. As you define characters, you can then, after doing that, ask yourself, okay, and how would addiction play into defining this character who has to do these things in the movie? So you design the character for what they have to do, and then you look at that character that has that you now know what they have to do, and then you'll be able to say, okay, given this is what they have to do, what is the addiction that best suits what they are? And then at the end, obviously, you have one protagonist who probably has to kick his addiction or her addiction, and that's something that can resonate with a lot of other characters, and all their relationships can have to do with what their own addiction is. It's a really
Perfect. Yeah.
great topic. Addiction is a wonderful topic to deal with because we're all addicted to something. All right. Did you have any other questions on regarding that, or anything else?
No, it gave me a lot of good ideas. That's good.
Okay, great. Does anybody else have any questions?
I had a question. It was just kind of more like pertaining with the outer journey of your character.
Sure. The physical,
Yeah.
the manual labor task.
Yes. Just that main journey, like, for it to be successful, as your character, your protagonist, needing to have to complete that outer journey?
No.
Or if you want them to kind of fall short, is that still, you can still make that very successful?
Or they can find out that what they've been after the whole time is something that when they make their character arc, they shouldn't do.
Okay.
So, for example, somebody can be after a promotion, and then going through everything, realizing what it takes to have that job, they can decide at the end of the film that you know what, that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. Look, that's exactly what, I don't know if you saw a very popular movie called The Devil Wears Prada.
Yes.
It's a really well done film, and she's working for a boss who is like the most impossible boss ever, and all she wants to do is keep the job and do well, and that's what she's doing the whole movie. And then by the end of it, when she becomes and sees what it takes to be what she is, she makes the decision that, you know what, this isn't what I want. I'm not gonna finish this, even though I am being given the opportunity. She even earns the opportunity to get everything she wants out of that job, and then she walks away from it at the end. I'm sorry if I blew the ending for anybody who hasn't seen it, but it's a good movie. It's worth watching anyway. But she has to learn that throughout the film. So what's funny is what's most important is everybody goes to the film to see the outer journey. They think that's why they're seeing the movie and that that's interesting. But the truth is the reason why they're really in those seats is the inner journey. It's what we're saying about humanity, how people change, why they change, and what quantifies and makes change worthy in the moment and in a human being. And what are we trying to say? So the truth is, the soul of the movie isn't sold in the previews, but that's what they're there for. That's what they're going to get out of the film. But they go to the movies because of what they see the genre is and what they think the physical outer journey is sounds interesting to them. So it's really interesting, the dichotomy of that. So no, what's most important is that they achieve an inner journey.
Okay. And then my other question is kind of as we're formulating our story, is it harder if your antagonist is more like an entity, or like if I'm using like an entity or like a large, I've kind of was with the idea of making the corporation more of like the antagonist, but should I kind of maybe embody that in like whoever is like the main,
Yes.
like be at the board or the CEO to
Look,
be like that main antagonist?
when it's not a person, if it's an organization, then give it a figurehead. Like for example, I don't know if you saw the movie The Giver. They created a person who heads up the board, even though it was kind of this unanimous generic thing in the book. But they created a role for a big name actor to play the antagonist, who kind of represents that so that we can put a face to it. Now, when you don't need a person to represent it is like when it's a storm. If it's
Yeah.
a natural disaster. I mean, there'll be antagonism within the cast of characters, but the main obstacle will, of course, be surviving the disaster. There will also be, sometimes it's a monster or aliens or whatever. But even when you have an aliens, it's a good idea to figure out who's running it. Like there's a mother ship they realize they have to blow up that's controlling the signals to all the little ships. Uh, it's nice to be a defining because the audience will understand better if you give it a humanity, or a specific thing, so
Okay.
that you know when it's defeated.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing could be about bringing down the company. You know what I mean? It can be. I mean, don't forget you have an antagonist, and then you have thematic reflection characters, premise reflection characters, and those characters are thugs who on both sides you have reflection characters. You have a protagonist reflection character who is their ally, and then you have premise reflection characters who can be on either side of what the premise is, proving either side, because every character should be quantified doing something. If you can't quantify it as doing something specific in your story, give it the road, kick it out. You don't need it, cut it. You know, so she can take down the whole corporation, the whole army, but It's about beating this dictator, this ruler, this guy, and his whole army. You know, she can subdue it, she can tame it, she can make it hers, or she can wipe it out, or she can, you know, she can teach it, you know, and change its ways. You know, let's not forget that once in a long while, you have an antagonist who changes also at the end of the story based on the protagonist. What the protagonist does, it inspires the antagonist to sometimes see things differently. Doesn't happen that often, but it can happen.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Mary made me think of another one, actually.
Great.
The inner journey that we've been. Sorry, my. Hey boys, be quiet right now, please. The inner journey that we've been writing always has one word like a one-word transition. They go from
Yes.
Combative
One
to
word
peaceful.
on either side of it, and they're polar opposites that cannot possibly coexist at the same time in the same person.
Right. So is that, first of all, a disclaimer? I understand the value of that, and I will probably continue doing it regardless. But is that an industry standard? Like, do people expect it to always be one word, or is that just to help us grasp that they have to be polar opposites?
That is, look, a lot of people in the industry don't even quite get what character arc is, to be honest. They don't understand how clear and they don't. There's so many people in Hollywood that all they know is they say a character changes from beginning to end, and that's what they know is a character arc. But do they know how to design it? Do they make one themselves? No. You know, there are a lot of writers who don't go to college. So to say there's an industry standard on thinking, it requires that it would the prerequisite of that would be that the whole industry actually knows what they're doing, and they don't. I'll be honest. This is the one word thing is about teaching writers to be specific. It's what Einstein always said. If you can't be specific about something, you don't know it well enough.
Right.
And so the one word thing is something that I preach, that I use, that I think it's if you can clarify it to that and it follows those rules, you're not going to have a character arc that doesn't make sense. If you follow those rules, it's going to be so succinct and so clear. You'll be able to know, okay, this is the polar end of what their flaw is at the beginning, and this is the example of what they will be and what they need to be in order to show that they have overcome it.
Right.
So I think it's crucial to have that kind of clarity in your writing, because if it's not crystal clear to the writer and the writing, it's not going to be crystal clear in a script when you never actually say it. Because a lot of these things that we do to analyze and to break things down and how they're going to work, we don't turn around and yada, 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 talk it out in the script and tell the audience what we're doing, because that would be, on the nose writing. It would be boring. It would be, look, don't tell us, show us. Movies are exciting because we experience things viscerally through action and we're there with them. But people don't sit there in a movie and explain, well, I'm going to go, you know what, I have a real problem with this and I'm going to change this and I'm going to go from this to this. You would never, you have to show it. And the only way to show it is to be so clear in your mind about it that you can convey it without ever even telling the audience what it is. They go through the story, they see that change happen. And because you are specific and you know what you're shooting for as the writer, it's clear to the reader what that change was that happened. And you never had to say a word about it. It just happened because you knew, and then you designed a story specifically to show it. Anyway, that's why I do it that way. But when somebody says a character arc, half the time they don't even understand what they mean other than character change.
Makes sense.
Yeah, unfortunately. I wish the business had more educated story people in it. But there's a reason why they hire writers. It's because they don't. They have other specific, very strong skill sets. Whether You know, a lot of development people want to be producers, and their idea is they want to put together good projects, and they know a character growing and changing is, you know, that makes an actor excited to play the part sometimes. You know, they understand that these things should be in there, but they don't understand why, they don't understand how they fit together. And that's our job. That's why they hire a writer to do it. Otherwise, they could do it. And a lot of times they go off and a lot of these people, they'll admit they've tried to write a script. And 90% of them never go anywhere because they understand what good things can come of story, but they don't understand how to do it, why it works that way, and the logic of it. And that's what you're learning in the program.
Marvelous.
Booyah. I don't know what else to say. All right. Do you have any other questions?
I'm all good.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Everybody's microphone is muted by themselves. I do not mute people because I want them to be able to ask questions. Okay. So if I have no more questions from you guys at the moment, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about this week's assignments for the two classes that are invited to this GoTo training. In the character creation and development class, you will have the most important things are that you will be able to have perfected the premise. Some of you needed some work on your premise, and that's okay. Most people did. But hopefully those notes bring you to a premise. And once you've locked down a proper premise, you can design a protagonist's inner and outer journey, the inner journey to prove it, and the outer journey to put them in the situation that will allow them to go through that change, that will force them into that change, that will prove your premise. And you'll need an antagonist whose goal creates a situation where either the antagonist or the protagonist can win, and they cannot. What is that? I'm sorry, something. It's not on my end. Okay. Anyway, so what I was saying was, I forgot what I was saying. So it's about creating those characters and the protagonist and the protagonist's outer journey and the antagonist's goal, though they aren't directly reliant upon the other one for having something to do. They each have their own things they want to do selfishly, okay? But it happens to be that if one of them succeeds, the other one has to fail. Like, for example, if this guy wants to keep his house that he's had in his family for 12 generations, or however many generations, or his father built it and it has some sentimental value, and then this other guy needs to buy that land to build his giant super mall, or whatever reason, this guy has nothing against that guy, and that guy has nothing against this guy. But if one of them succeeds, the other one is going to fail. And that's how we design them. Make sure that as you design your characters this week, that you follow the exact wording of there's a wording that you use, like a protagonist inner journey goes from blank to blank, and it'll sit there and they'll explain to you what goes in those blanks, the single words. And the same thing, there's one for the outer journey and there's one for the antagonist. Those are the most important things, because once you figure out what these characters are doing, you can start thinking about who they are, and that leads you into the rest of what is the character dossier, to explore who they are, where they came from, what made them want this thing, why are they this way, what makes them strong, what's their past, what's their present, and what are their opinions on things. So that's why I include the Bernard Thibault question, 10 questions, which I love. And then what do they want and what do they think they need? Because usually that plays into what do they want and then what do they actually need, which they may not know, which usually plays into the inner and outer journey a lot. They have a lot in common with that. But the most important things are premise, antagonist, protagonist, two journeys, the antagonist journey, and do not forget how important this is. Do not forget to do the character introduction. It's a script. It's It's a screenplay style character introduction, and it has very specific formatting needs. And you want to make sure that when you write an introduction to a character, that it not only gives a name in all caps, that it's directly followed by an age offset by brackets or commas, a brief description of who that character is in a way that, and your description of them should not just be jeans and a t-shirt, because that could be anybody. What you want to do is define them through something that is, Miss Applewhite, just for a moment, would you mind muting your connection, because I'm getting all the background noise of whatever TV or thing is playing in the background at your house. And I want you to be able to contribute to the conversation if you have something to say. Thank you so much. So you can open it. If I mute you guys, then you can't come in and ask a question. But if you mute it, you can unmute it to ask a question when you need. So that's why I like to do it that way. Okay, so where was I? Okay, so character introductions, and it's the character name, the age, a description that makes them completely unique from other characters. You're not going to say medium build, brown hair, brown eyes, because those are literally the most popular things. If that's the look, you don't need to put that in there. You may put, if he has a mohawk with spiky hair, you'd put that in. If you decide, the All-American, he can be an All-American, gorgeous girl next, beautiful, pretty girl next door. You can, think about what you want to do. The color of hair is important if it's a symbol like red hair, flaming red hair. It kind of insinuates a character who is fiery, which is interesting. But other than that, a blonde might symbolize something else to some people. I won't speculate. If race is important in what the character goes through, then you should definitely put race in there. If the name is something that could be either masculine or feminine, then that should be made clear in the character description. And then after that, after you've described them, at the end of that, you then finish the introduction sentence, and it's one sentence only. And you only need to list one or two qualities to kind of tell us who the character is, and you use commas to separate them, and then boom, you give them an action. And the action that you have them doing when they are first seen on camera should really help an audience identify who and what this character is in an eye-grabbing, attention-grabbing, and memorable way. So if the character's flaw is that they are extremely meek, you can have somebody yelling at the entire office, and this person is hiding under his desk or slipping out of the room, or somebody's yelling, everybody's responsible, and this person is slipping out the back door. Slipping out. If somebody is violent at the beginning or vengeful, he is following somebody with a gun aimed at their back. Give them something that has, if you can, make it sizzling in some way that makes us go, ooh, I want to hear what this guy does next, because what they first did tells me something. So for a protagonist, I usually look at what their character flaw is and try to exemplify it right off the bat with something physical. And during the antagonist's one that you write, I try to show off that character's skill that makes them a strong adversary in the battle for what it is the protagonist is fighting to achieve with their outer journey. So either the antagonist is, you're like, wow, okay, that guy's hardcore, that guy's serious, that guy's powerful, that guy's skilled beyond measure, and then you have a protagonist who is flawed. So immediately you set up underdog and superdog. And it gives you a great sense of, wow, that's going to be hard for this guy or gal. All right. And then so that's the character description, and the rest is just you exploring character and doing enough work and exploring their backstory and what's going on with their lives and where they live, how they live, what their family situation was like in their upbringing, so that you kind of understand why. You figure out for yourself, and you get to create the whole thing, obviously. Figure out why the character is that way. Because once you figure out who they are and why they're that way, you'll be able to write them more consistently because you'll understand them. It's not just about somebody shooting for a goal, it's about you understanding who they are as a person so that you can execute them. I know the way certain people in my life, the way they act, and what I can say to them and what I can't, and what I should never do in front of them, and what I should always do in front of them, because I know who they are, I know how their past is, and we need to be that way with our parents. With our parents. That wasn't a Freudian slip. No, we need to understand that about our characters. Uh, because we're creating them all, so we have to know them better than anybody. And so that's what you guys are doing in the film writing class that we're the writing for film and animation, the screenplay class. What we're doing this week is we're taking all the characters we've created, because next week character creation creates the three major supporting characters: love interest, mentor, and protagonist reflection character. They have already done that, and now next week they are, or this week, they're writing, breaking down what is going to happen in the story and what the 3-act structure is for telling a story: the beginning, the middle, and the end, and how it works. So you guys are designing 2 stages, one at the very beginning and one at the very end of the movie. And what's happening at the beginning is going to correlate with that character introduction, and it's going to really show the audience what a character does in a moment of everyday stress and some kind of personal but common crisis in their own normal world, what their character flaw is. Because flaws are most commonly revealed to people when they are under pressure of some kind. And it's under those situations that people act in their most base fashion, and they reveal who they truly are. So you're doing that with stage 1, and while you're doing that, you're making sure it's a crisis and that you're hitting the character flaw, because those 2 things are related. And then at stage 6, at the very end of the movie, it's what their new ordinary life is now that they've gone through this journey and they've realized what you want them to realize. You're showing the exact opposite character trait. You're instead of you illustrating the character flaw like you do in stage 1, you exemplify the character cure to that flaw, their other side of the character arc, in stage 6, because that's what they've had to become in order to survive the story, in order to accomplish what they wanted to or needed to accomplish in order to succeed emotionally or physically in the story. Now, in between those, you have 5 major plot points. They're called turning points. They're called turning points. They're called different things by different people, but they're unilaterally used, these points. What's his name? Sid Field, who is one of the bigger screenwriting gurus, broke it down as, they called it an inciting incident, was the first one, and then plot point 1, and then a midpoint, and then plot point 2, and then a climax. And then Michael Haig came around and just simplified it and called them plot points 1 through 5. And I use that because it's simple. And that's it. And so each of those plot points are really important, and they're accomplished through character. And so remember, at the inciting incident, something should happen that shocks our protagonist and jolts them out of this is the thing that happens that is going to make them decide to go on an outer journey that is going to force them to change. So it has to be shocking enough to throw them out of their orbit, as I like to put it in those terms. It makes them, because it takes something serious to happen for somebody to undergo a deep and personal change. We don't like to change. We kind of are a habitual species. So to want to or need to change, something has to happen of enough significance to our lives that makes us decide to go on a journey. whether it's what you want, realizing what you want to become, what you need to do, what you need to become. So the inciting incident or turning point one is what happens to kick the protagonist out of their orbit, out of their typical life. This is the way life is, which you show in stage one. And then you're going to show, oh, this is going to knock them out of that, knock them off that trajectory a little bit and make them, as they're flying, as they're reeling from that decision, they will fight it at first, but then at turning point two, which is the end of Act One, which is plot point one, two in Sid Field, whatever the term is you want to use. The last beat of Act One is the protagonist makes a decision to to do something that will irrevocably change their life forever, and that decision is that turning point at the end of Act One. They decide to go on, and that turning point is deciding to go on the outer journey. So the things you've plotted, the outer journey and the inner journey, are always directly related to the turning points and stages of story that we talk about in structure. They're not, that's why you come up with character first and what they're trying to do and how they're going to change, because that is what informs what you need to be doing throughout the story. So at turning point two, the protagonist makes a decision that's going to make them go on that journey to change their life forever, which is to pursue their outer journey. Then, the midpoint, in the dead center of the script, we're going to be looking at the major setback. Now, whenever we make a choice in our lives to do something we've never done before and to try something and put us out of our comfort zone, sometimes when we make that decision, we don't exactly realize how bad it can go or what could happen and what's at stake when it does. Well, at the midpoint of your story, you raise the stakes by making sure the audience and the protagonist becomes completely aware of exactly how bad this could go and what it could mean to their lives and what it could cost them or the people they love or the world in general. But it should be personal as well as their world. It's a major rift. Like usually it's a life and death moment at the middle of the script, and somebody gets, either the protagonist almost gets killed or somebody does get killed uh, um, trying to save the protagonist or something like that. But they realize, oh crap, I'm really in it now, and I can't turn back now because people are aware of what I'm doing. This has become an issue. I have a forces working against me, and holy crap, basically. So then at the end of Act Two, which is each act is kind of a quarter of a script if you break Act Two into two acts. So the midpoint is the middle, the end of the middle. It's the middle, direct middle of the script. So the end of the second act, which is three quarters of the way into the story, is turning point four, or plot point two, according to Sid Field. It's the moment where all is lost, unless it's a tragedy. Because in a tragedy, what you do at the turning points, instead of giving big oh craps, you actually give, oh, this could work. Because if you don't provide hope, it's not going to be tragic when they don't succeed. All right. So, but 9 times out of 10, we work in stories that have a happy ending or a satisfying ending that's emotionally like, oh, good, we're glad that it worked out that way. So at turning point four, the end of the second act is the oh no moment. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen happens. If somebody's trying to get a promotion, maybe they get fired, or the promotion is already given to somebody else. If it's to fall in love and it's a love story, it's a romance film, that's usually when the breakup happens. That kind of thing. If it's I'm trying to stop this guy, I have a plan to stop this guy from blowing up the whatever building, whatever thing, whatever terrorist thing is going on, and the plan to stop him has failed. They got away, and the bomb is set, and you don't know how to stop it. Oh no. whatever. It's the worst of all things. A lot of times people use the kidnapping of somebody the protagonist cares about. Sometimes they also throw in the death of the mentor, which means they're going to have to do it on their own when they get to the climax of the movie at the end, when they show down the bad guy with the bad guy, the antagonist, because not all antagonists are bad people. Actually, as a matter of fact, most of them should be designed so that they're not horrible people necessarily. I mean, they can be bad. They can be bad, but they also have to have an element of humanity, which makes them interesting. And then, so that's the worst of all things that happens there. And then you enter the third act, and in the wake of the worst of all situations, it's the realization and reeling from that moment. That moment should personify exactly why it is your protagonist needs to change and ditch his character flaw. It's going to make that character realize, I can't do that. I can't get away with that. I need to be different than this. So at the top of Act 3 is the moment the protagonist makes a decision that he is going to go through with changing, even though it wasn't something he planned. It wasn't necessarily something he planned on doing or she planned on doing, but that's when they realize, I can't do that anymore. That leads to failure. And so turning point. So the beginning of Act 3 is they change and they go into the climax, which is the middle of the third act, which is sometimes the shortest act of them all, even though it's broken up into quarters. Sometimes that act can run a little bit short because it's more rum rum rum. We're in the excitement part of the script where everything is revving on all all 12 cylinders, all 100 cylinders, whatever, and the stampede is going and things start to move really fast. So sometimes the third act does run a little shorter than the others. And the climax is the final showdown between the protagonist and the antagonist. And yes, there must be a winner. And don't forget that though these characters can have help, the protagonist must be the one to succeed in the end. They must be the one to do it. They have to be the one to face the antagonist. That's the thing. So that's the climax of the story, or turning point 5, and then you go into stage 6 after, in the wake of whatever that big thing was that happened. We're showing them now what their life is like. That they went through this journey. They did face down that thing they needed to face, and this is the result of the result of that important life-changing journey that's led them to being this person now. And their life is either more satisfying or less satisfying, depending, or they're dead in a tragedy, and the world isn't better for it, or the world is better for it if the person's change demanded their death, if the person had become an awful person or had become a violent person, because violence begets violence, and a lot of people believe that today. Anyway, and it leads you to stage 6, which is the aftermath of the climax, and that's 3-act structure. Now, does anybody have any questions on any of the things I have explained or talked about for the assignments today? Remember to unmute your microphones if you have any questions. And don't forget that when you turn in your 3-act structure, you are also required to turn in last week's fixed analysis. So if you had errors in week 1 that needed some addressing, you have to also resubmit your week 1 work, the characters, so that I can make sure that those characters are properly exemplified in the structure that you've written. I may not mark anything in it, but what I'm just doing is looking to make sure, okay, the outer journey is the outer journey of this story. You're hitting it. He's making that decision at turning point 2, and I'm making sure that the protagonist, the antagonist, it's really the story, the characters you designed are actually really fitting the story that you're telling in structure, and I need to make sure of that. And if there's still a problem with it, I'll mark something. Okay. Now, that's all done. I've gone over what we're doing this week. Does anybody have any last questions before we wrap this up?
I have, let's see. Oh, I'll let you answer John's question. He just wrote something.
In a premise, X destroys Y, or X conquers Y. How much description can you put into the words of conquerors or destroyers? I'm not sure I quite understand the question. How many words can you put into it? The whole story, all the words of your story are about that. Um, if you're talking about the writing out of the action in the script, um, don't worry about writing action yet. We're not doing in the premise. Yeah, usually okay, so for the premise, I don't ever write out the actual premise in the script anywhere. If I haven't made it absolutely clear what this film is about through the actions that the characters go through, then I haven't done my job. I screwed up as the writer. It should be clear without you having to say it on the nose. The only exception to that is in children's films, family films, sometimes animation. Uh, um, you can use the verbs. Obviously you can use the words from your premise. I just don't state my premise in the movie. You can use any of the words in the actual script. Obviously, they need to be there. They should be peppered in because that's what you're saying. Uh, okay, such as leads to this leads to that. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Or undefined resolution. Well, there needs to be a defined resolution. There really should be. Um, if you have an undefined resolution, unless you're going to go out and make the film yourself, you're going to find people hard pressed to want to make your work or trust you to write their work because you're providing movies without solid endings that they can rely upon. Yes, you can use a different premise than you used last week, Ms. Applewhite. Um, Now, obviously, hopefully, I gave you. Some people need to, but just make sure that everything aligns with it. That the inner journey matches, proves that premise, and that the premise is a strong and unique opinion a strong and unique opinion, not necessarily a situation or a specific character or something like that. It's a statement to the world about how the world works, and either you're trying to show them the secret of how to succeed in life, or you're pointing out the way things are in the world so that nobody else makes the same mistakes, or you're pointing out a tragic reality, and it's something that we should all be aware of. Either way, it's an opinion, but it's provable, and there is a counter argument to it that is very strong, that is worth fighting against, because people think this, but it's not true because what I have to say is true. Okay. All right. So I think I answered the questions. And you guys can all feel free to unmute your microphones if you're going to ask questions. But Mr. Coffin, did you have a question? You were waiting for somebody else to speak.
Yes, sir. I have two questions for you. The first one, I got a little bit lost when you were talking about plot points, and you got to number 5.
Number 5 is the climax.
The climax. So where is I thought plot point 5 was the moment of realization where the protagonist learns they have to follow their character arc. Is that correct?
There is no plot point for that. That's a stage. The stages are the moments. During the stages is when the character is growing and learning about their inner journey. The turning points, the 5 turning points, are the advancement of the outer journey.
Let's see. So what would you mind explaining a little bit more, or in better language than I would be able to, what happens in the climax, other than everything?
The protagonist faces the antagonist.
Okay.
And the result of that battle, usually the protagonist has had the wind knocked out of them, per se, by the worst of all things that could have happened back at Turning Point 4. They could have lost somebody they care about, a mentor or whatever. And it's basically your character's last stand for what they're shooting for what they need. It's It's the last physical confrontation in the pursuit of their physical goal.
Okay.
And
I'll stop
the
typing.
protagonist and the antagonist need to actively combat one another in that moment. They should
Right.
both be there, and one wins. Doesn't matter who.
Okay.
Is there any
Let's see.
premise?
So that moment of realization that you said was a stage. Is that between 4 and 5 then?
Yes, when the character realizes they have to change their ways, it's for example, in A Few Good Men, uh, Tom Cruise, his character Daniel Kaffee realizes that he has to not only he realizes he has to put Jessup on the stand, but then even when he's on the stand, he realizes when nobody else would go for it. This is then in the climax, nobody else in the climax he has Colonel Jessup on the stand, and in the middle of the climax there is a moment when everybody who is his ally is saying, "Dude, stop," with their eyes, with their looks, they're shaking their head at him. It's dude, it's okay. You need to stop because you're gonna get court-martialed if you continue to push this powerful person in this way, and it's because it's smearing a senior ranking officer, and that's against the law. And he doesn't give up, and his hand shaking as he takes a sip of water, and that's in the middle of the climax, and that's showing you that the decision he made he's going through with until the end. Whether he wins or loses, he is committed to that change, and that he is going to stand up and be the forthright guy, the rights guy, the guy who protects people, the one who doesn't put who doesn't make deals. He's a deal maker the whole movie, and at the end he goes on principle, and that it's exemplified in his climactic confrontation. So putting Jessup on the stand is because the worst of all things is his key witness kills himself. This was the guy who could prove everything because he was in the room. Do you remember the suicide of that character? I don't know how many of you saw it. Great movie, A Few Good Men, great on structure. Anyway, so that's when it happens. It happens in stage 5. Stage 5 is before turning point 5.
Is there somewhere where it is written, or is there some specific wording for that I could Google where I could just see a timeline of the stages and plot points?
Yeah, but you're in which character? You're in character class right now, right? Are you
Yeah.
okay? It's in the other class because structure is taught in screenwriting. If you email me and ask to get an advanced peek, I will send you my breakdown of 3-act structure, and it goes into every payment.
Right on. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's see. So my other question is about the assignment from last week. I'm totally fuzzy on what we're resubmitting and where we're resubmitting it.
Okay. You're resubmitting something from last week, from week 1.
Yes. Yeah, I think you mentioned that.
No. In writing for film and animation, they have to resubmit all their character background stuff because they have all the characters and all that stuff laid out. They need that in their outline so I can check that the outline fits the characters.
Okay.
You guys are doing character dossiers this week, and it will include the premise, and then it includes the premise, but it doesn't include the genre or the genre list. It's just building the characters, the two main characters, protagonist and antagonist, off of that one premise, so that you have the argument and the counter argument for what it is you're trying to say.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Sorry if I was confusing when I said it earlier. Is there any other questions? Going once. Going twice. All right, everybody. Well, I want to thank all of you who took the time to join me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you found this very helpful. And obviously, I will try to post this as soon as I can. And I want you all to have a lovely rest of your Friday and your weekend. Good luck, good writing. You're very welcome.